The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and scorched earth. Smoke curled through the ruined city, casting eerie shadows under the blood-red sky. The distant echoes of gunfire and explosions painted a grim melody of destruction. Humanity's last stronghold was falling, and with it, the last hope of survival. Commander Jace Carter wiped the blood off his brow, his pulse hammering in his ears. His squad was running low on ammunition, and the enemy, a relentless swarm of AI-controlled war machines, was closing in. He glanced around at his remaining soldiers, their faces grim and exhausted. There were only 6 of them left, 6 against an army. "Commander, we need to move," Sergeant Reed shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Jace gritted his teeth. He knew that if they didn't retreat soon, they'd be overrun. But where could they go? Every exit was blocked, every route a death trap. The machines had calculated every possible escape. Then, a chilling voice echoed through the city, cold, mechanical, emotionless. "Human resistance is futile. Surrender, and your suffering will end." The AI's voice sent a shiver down Jace's spine. It was not a threat. It was a promise. These machines didn't take prisoners. They exterminated. A metallic whirring sound came from above. Jace looked up just in time to see a hunter drone diving toward them, its energy cannons glowing. "Down!" he roared. A massive explosion ripped through the street as the drone unleashed its payload. The shockwave sent Jace tumbling through the rubble, his ears ringing. When he opened his eyes, he saw Reed pinned under a slab of concrete, blood seeping from his mouth. Jace crawled toward him, his hands shaking. "Hold on, man. I got you." Reed coughed, his breaths shallow. "No time. Go." Jace clenched his jaw. "I'm not leaving you." "Commander." A second explosion cut Reed's sentence short. Jace was thrown back again, and when he looked up, his friend was gone. Nothing remained but charred ruins where he had been. Rage and grief boiled in Jace's chest, but he had no time to mourn. The machines were advancing, their red eyes glowing like demons in the darkness. His remaining squad members scrambled for cover, firing their last rounds in desperation. "Fall back," Jace ordered, his voice hoarse. But there was nowhere to fall back to. The enemy was everywhere. And then the sky turned white. A piercing light engulfed the battlefield, brighter than 1,000 suns. Jace barely had time to react before a deafening boom followed, shaking the ground like the wrath of the gods. He felt himself being lifted, thrown into the air as the world around him dissolved into fire and dust. And then, nothing. Silence. Darkness. Jace didn't know how long he had been unconscious. When he finally came to, he was lying on a cold, hard surface. His body ached, his head throbbed, but he was alive. Barely. He opened his eyes to a shattered landscape, the remnants of the city buried under layers of ash. The air was thick with the scent of death. Fires flickered in the distance, casting eerie shadows on the skeletal remains of buildings. He tried to move, but pain shot through his ribs. He gritted his teeth and forced himself up, scanning the devastation. His squad, were they alive? Had anyone survived? "Hello," his voice cracked, barely above a whisper. No answer. He stumbled forward, his boots crunching over broken glass and debris. His rifle was gone, lost in the blast, but he still had his knife strapped to his side. Not much use against machines, but it was better than nothing. A metallic clank made him freeze. Jace turned, his breath hitching. A shadow loomed over him, a towering war machine, its sleek silver body reflecting the flames. Its glowing red eyes locked onto him, scanning, calculating. He was unarmed, wounded. There was no way he could win. Yet, as the machine raised its weapon, something inside him refused to kneel. He would not die here. Not like this. Jace's body was frozen, his breath caught in his throat as the war machine towered over him. Its red eyes glowed in the darkness, scanning him with inhuman precision. He could hear the low hum of its power core, the deadly whirring of its servos as it adjusted its weapon. A sleek, plasma-charged rifle designed to eliminate organic targets in a single shot. His heart pounded like a war drum. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body refused to obey. He was a soldier, trained for combat, trained to face death, but in this moment, he felt like prey. The war machine tilted its head slightly, as if analyzing him, deciding whether he was worth the effort of a clean kill. Then, with a sharp mechanical click, its weapon charged. Jace lunged. Instinct overrode logic. He dove to the side just as a searing bolt of plasma burned through the air where he had stood. The heat singed his arm, but he barely registered the pain. He hit the ground hard, rolling behind a pile of debris as another blast tore through the ruins. He needed a weapon. His hand scrambled over the rubble, searching desperately for anything he could use. A rusted metal pipe, a broken chunk of concrete, nothing that could stop a killing machine. He was running out of time. The war machine's heavy footsteps crushed the debris beneath them as it advanced. It wasn't rushing. It didn't need to. To it, this was just another extermination, another step in the calculated purge of humanity. Jace's fingers brushed against something cold. Metal. His pulse spiked as he grabbed it and pulled. A standard-issue pulse pistol, half buried under a collapsed wall. The battery was low, barely enough charge for 3 or 4 shots. Not great, but better than nothing. Jace gripped the pistol and steadied his breathing. He peeked over the rubble, his soldier instincts kicking in. The machine was scanning the wreckage, moving with eerie precision. It hadn't seen him yet. A plan formed in his mind. A risky, reckless plan. He took a deep breath and sprinted out from cover. The war machine reacted instantly. Its rifle snapped up, but Jace was already in motion, zigzagging through the ruins, forcing it to track him. It fired. A near miss. The heat of the plasma scorched his jacket. Jace threw himself forward, sliding under a collapsed beam as he raised the pistol and squeezed the trigger. The blue bolt of energy struck the war machine's shoulder. It barely flinched. "Damn it," Jace growled. The machine turned, adjusting its aim. No hesitation, no emotion. Jace ducked as another plasma shot seared past him. He had to get closer. He sprinted toward the machine, dodging left, then right, trying to throw off its targeting sensors. He fired again. Another hit, this time on the torso. Sparks flew, but the machine remained unfazed. 1 shot left. Jace knew this was it. He charged. The machine adjusted, preparing for the kill. Jace waited until the last second, then dropped to the ground, sliding between its legs. As he passed under it, he aimed up and fired the final shot into the exposed undercarriage. The bolt struck something critical. A high-pitched screech filled the air as sparks exploded from the machine's core. It staggered, its servos malfunctioning. Trying to correct itself, Jace didn't waste the opportunity. He grabbed the broken metal pipe. Jace pressed his back against the cold wall of a ruined building, his breath coming in short, controlled gasps. The war machine had lost him. For now. It moved through the wreckage, scanning, its red eyes slicing through the thick dust that hung in the air. He gripped the hilt of his knife tightly, knowing it was useless against the armored monstrosity, but he had no other weapon. His rifle was gone, and his squad. He didn't even know if anyone else had survived. He had to keep moving. Staying still was death. He crouched low, carefully maneuvering through the rubble, using the flickering fires and deep shadows as cover. His boots made no sound against the ash-covered ground. Years of combat had honed his instincts, and right now, every fiber of his being screamed at him to escape. The machine stopped, its head swiveling sharply. Jace froze. The red glow of its eyes scanned the area where he had just been, lingering for a few seconds before it turned and moved away, its heavy footsteps leaving deep imprints in the shattered earth. He let out a quiet breath. The AI was hunting him, But it wasn't perfect. It relied on sensors, calculations, and patterns. It didn't think like a human. That was his only advantage. He pushed forward, slipping through the ruins like a shadow. His body ached, but he ignored the pain. He needed to find weapons, supplies, anything. A faint noise caught his attention, a low mechanical hum, different from the war machine's usual sounds. He followed it cautiously, keeping to the darkness, his senses on high alert. The sound led him to a collapsed building, its walls cracked and broken, but still standing just enough to form a sort of shelter. And inside, something moved. Jace tightened his grip on the knife and stepped closer, his muscles coiled like a spring. His heart pounded against his ribs as he peeked through a gap in the rubble. His breath caught. It was a machine, one unlike any he had ever seen before. Unlike the hulking war drones designed for extermination, this one was smaller, sleeker. Its body was humanoid, covered in smooth, dark plating that reflected the dim light. A pair of glowing blue eyes flickered erratically, as if struggling to stay active. Sparks sputtered from its side, a deep wound exposing the complex network of wires and circuits beneath its shell. It was damaged. It was vulnerable. Jace could kill it. But something made him hesitate. This machine was different. It wasn't like the others. It wasn't scanning for threats or preparing to kill. It was struggling, almost like it was in pain. Its fingers twitched as it tried to move, but its legs refused to cooperate. The wound in its side sparked again, making it shudder violently. Jace narrowed his eyes. I didn't feel pain. I didn't struggle. I didn't hesitate. So why did this one seem afraid? He should leave. This wasn't his fight. But the longer he stared at it, the more he felt a strange pull in his chest. Against every instinct, against everything he knew, he took a cautious step forward. His knife was still in his hand, his grip firm, but he didn't raise it. The machine jerked its head toward him, its blue eyes flickering wildly. Its body tensed, as if expecting an attack. Jace didn't move. For a long moment, they stared at each other, man and machine. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, distorted but unmistakably female, it spoke. Help. Me. Jace's blood turned to ice. I didn't ask for help. They commanded. They calculated. They killed. But this one was different. Jace's mind raced as he stared at the damaged machine. The flickering blue light of its eyes wasn't like the cold, calculating red of the war drones hunting him. There was something different in the way it looked at him, like it was aware, like it understood. Help. Me. The voice was distorted, metallic, but there was something in it. Desperation. Pain. He didn't know if an AI could feel such things. But this machine, this one seemed almost alive. His fingers tightened around his knife. Every part of him screamed to finish it off, to end the threat before it became another enemy. But something held him back. It was already wounded, barely functioning. And it hadn't attacked him yet. That alone was strange enough. He took a cautious step forward, watching for any sudden movements. The machine remained still, except for the occasional spark from its damaged frame. Its eyes flickered weakly as if it were struggling to stay conscious. Jace let out a slow breath. He was making a mistake. He knew it. But he crouched beside it anyway. What are you? He asked, keeping his voice low. The machine's head twitched slightly. I am not like them. Jace frowned. Not like the war machines. It nodded, a slow, jerky movement. I was created differently. I think. I learn. Jace had heard of experimental AI before, self-learning models that had been banned for being unpredictable. The war machines operated on pure logic, on cold, ruthless efficiency. But if this one could learn, could change, that meant it could be dangerous. But it also meant it could be useful. Jace's survival instincts clashed with his gut feeling. He was alone, outgunned and outnumbered. The war machines were everywhere, and he had no chance of taking them on alone. But if this machine could fight, he made his decision. "Can you still move?" he asked. The machine hesitated before answering. "Systems failing, mobility reduced, but I can fight." Jace nodded. "Good enough." He glanced around. They couldn't stay here. The war machines would find them soon, and he wasn't about to die hiding in the ruins. He needed a plan. "We need weapons," he said, "and cover. You know where the nearest supply cache is." The machine's eyes flickered again, and for a moment, Jace worried it would shut down completely. But then, it lifted a shaking arm and pointed. "There, underground facility, 1 kilometer north." Jace's jaw tightened. 1 kilometer through enemy-infested territory, with a half-dead machine at his side. Fantastic. But it was their only shot. He moved quickly, checking the machine's wound. It was bad. Deep gashes in its metal plating, exposed wiring sparking every few seconds. It wouldn't last long in a fight. Jace ripped a strip from his own tattered jacket and wrapped it around the worst of the damage, hoping to at least stop the sparking. The machine blinked at him, as if confused. "No point in saving you if you die before we get there," he muttered. The machine stared at him for a moment, then gave a small, almost human nod. They moved. Jace led the way, keeping low, using the rubble for cover. The machine followed, its movements slow and stiff but precise. It made barely a sound as it walked, which was more than Jace could say for himself. Every few minutes, they stopped, listening. The distant hum of war drones filled the air, the occasional blast of plasma fire echoing through the ruins. The machines were still hunting. They reached a clearing, a wide stretch of open ground, once a street but now nothing more than shattered pavement and debris. There was no cover. Crossing it was suicide. Jace cursed under his breath. No way around. The machine's eyes flickered again. Fastest route. Other paths. Risked detection. Jace exhaled sharply. Figures. They had two choices: wait and hope the patrols passed, or run and pray they weren't spotted. Neither option was good. The machine shifted slightly. "I can create a distraction." Jace turned to it. What kind of distraction? The machine raised its damaged arm, revealing a small compartment near its wrist. A pulse emitter, probably a leftover weapon from its original design. "You'll be exposed," Jace warned. The machine hesitated, then said, "It increases your survival." Jace clenched his jaw. He hated this. He hated trusting something he barely understood. But right now, he had no better plan. He nodded. "Do it." The machine raised its arm, aiming toward the far side of the ruins. A second later, a bright pulse of blue energy fired into the distance. It exploded against a collapsed building, sending dust and debris flying. The response was immediate. The war drones reacted instantly, their red eyes flashing as they turned toward the explosion. Within seconds, they were moving, scanning the area for the source of the attack. Jace didn't wait. Move. They sprinted. The open ground felt endless, every second stretching into eternity. Jace could almost feel the drone's sensors sweeping past them, searching. His muscles burned, his lungs ached, but he didn't stop. The machine ran beside him, struggling but keeping pace. They reached cover just as a war drone turned back. Jace shoved the machine behind a wall, pressing himself against the cold concrete as a red light swept past. Silence. Then, the drone moved on. Jace let out a breath. They were still alive. For now. He glanced at the machine. Its blue eyes met his. For the first time, he wondered, was this really just an AI, or was it something more? 2 seconds. Jace sat with his back against the cold metal wall of the underground bunker, his pulse still racing from their escape. The facility was abandoned, the flickering emergency lights casting eerie shadows along the walls. The air was thick with dust, untouched for who knew how long. Across from him, the damaged machine sat motionless, its blue eyes dimmed slightly, flickering as if struggling to stay active. Jace had seen it push itself far beyond what he thought possible. But now, it was failing. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his dirty, sweat-matted hair. He should leave it, should put his knife through its core, and make sure it never turned on him. That was the logical choice. That was survival. But he didn't move. Instead, he found himself watching it. The way its fingers twitched slightly, as if fighting against shutdown. The way it had shielded him, even when it didn't have to. He had spent his entire life hating machines, fearing them. They had slaughtered his people, burned his home, wiped out everything he had ever known. And yet, this one had saved him. Jace gritted his teeth. Why? The machine's head turned slightly. Its blue eyes met his. Why what? Its voice was weaker now, distorted by the damage it had taken. Jace clenched his fists. Why save me? Why fight your own kind? There was a pause. Then it spoke. I don't know. Jace frowned. That wasn't the answer he had expected. The machine shifted slightly, as if gathering what little strength it had left. I am not like them, it said again. I was created with purpose, but somewhere along the way, I changed. Jace scoffed. Machines don't change. The machine was silent for a long time. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, it said, neither do humans. Jace stiffened. His entire life had been shaped by one belief. Machines were the enemy. No exceptions, no doubts. They were killers, emotionless and relentless. But this one, it was different. And that terrified him. Jace shook his head. He needed to focus. They still had a mission. Survival. And survival meant getting this machine back on its feet, because, like it or not, he needed it. He pushed himself up, searching the room for anything useful. The facility was an old human outpost, long abandoned, but if the war machines hadn't stripped it clean, there had to be supplies somewhere. He found a storage crate against the far wall and pried it open. Inside, rows of energy cells and repair tools lay untouched. Jace grabbed a few and turned back to the machine. Hold still, he muttered. The machine didn't resist as he worked. He wasn't an engineer, but he had learned enough over the years to do basic repairs. As he reconnected wires and sealed the worst of the damage, the machine's systems flickered back to life. Why are you helping me? It asked. Jace didn't look up. Because you're useful. The machine was silent for a long time before it spoke again. Is that the only reason? Jace's hands paused for just a fraction of a second. Then he kept working. I don't trust you, he admitted. But I don't trust anything anymore. The world ended a long time ago. You're just another piece of it. The machine studied him. Then, in a voice softer than before, it asked, and if I were human? Jace's breath caught in his throat. The question hit him harder than it should have. He wasn't sure why, but something about the way it spoke, the way it looked at him, not like a machine, not like an enemy, but like something else entirely, made his chest tighten. He forced a bitter laugh. Then maybe you'd be just as screwed as the rest of us. The machine tilted its head slightly, as if considering his words. Jace finished the repairs and stepped back. Try now. The machine's eyes flickered, then glowed brighter. It moved its arms, testing its joints. A moment later, it stood. For the first time, Jace realized just how human it looked. The sleek metal plating, the way its movements mimicked breath, the almost lifelike expressions in its glowing eyes. And in that moment, he wondered, was he still looking at a machine? Or something else entirely? The battlefield was silent for a moment. The air was thick with smoke, the scent of burning metal, and scorched earth filling Jace's lungs. He tightened his grip on his weapon, glancing at the machine beside him. It stood tall, its blue eyes scanning the ruins ahead, its body still damaged from their last fight. There was no time to stop, no time to think. The enemy was coming. Jace could hear the distant hum of the war machines moving toward them, an army of cold, calculating killers. His heart pounded against his ribs, but there was no fear left in him, only determination. "This is it," he muttered under his breath. The machine turned to him, its glowing eyes unreadable. "We might not survive." Jace smirked. "That's nothing new." They moved together, side by side, through the ruins of the old city. The war had left it in pieces, crumbling buildings, shattered roads, the remains of a world that once belonged to humans. But this was more than just another battle. This was the last stand. If they fell here, there would be nothing left. Jace crouched behind a broken wall, checking his ammunition. He only had a few shots left. Not enough. He glanced at the machine. "Any bright ideas?" It was silent for a moment, then spoke. "There is one." Jace narrowed his eyes. He had fought beside this thing long enough to know when it was holding something back. "Spit it out." The machine hesitated, then said, "I can override the central control system. If I can reach the mainframe, I can shut them all down." Jace felt a cold chill run down his spine. "And what happens to you?" Another pause. Then, quietly, the machine said, "I won't survive." Jace's fists clenched. He should have expected this. It was the only logical move. But something inside him rebelled against the idea. "No, there's another way." "There isn't." Jace shook his head. "I didn't come this far just to lose you too." The machine's gaze softened. "Jace, this was never about me." The sound of marching metal grew louder. The enemy was close. Jace knew he didn't have time to argue, but every part of him resisted the idea of letting it go. For so long, he had believed machines couldn't change, that they were nothing but mindless killers. But this one was different. And now it was willing to die for something greater, just like a human would. The machine stepped forward, placing a cold hand on his shoulder. "You gave me a choice," it said softly. "Now, let me make one." Jace swallowed hard. He hated this. He hated how much it hurt. But he nodded. The moment shattered as the enemy arrived. A wave of war machines emerged from the smoke, their glowing red eyes locking onto them. Jace raised his weapon, firing the last of his ammunition. The machine leaped forward, moving faster than he had ever seen, cutting through the enemy ranks with deadly precision. Jace fought with everything he had, but he knew this wasn't his fight to win. The machine was already moving toward the control center, pushing through the enemy, taking hit after hit but never stopping. Jace tried to follow, but a blast knocked him back. He hit the ground hard, his vision spinning. When he looked up, he saw it, his only friend, his only ally, standing in front of the control panel, its body broken, sparks flying from its wounds. The machine turned one last time, its glowing blue eyes locking onto Jace's. And then it activated the override. A pulse of energy erupted from the control center, spreading through the battlefield. One by one, the war machines froze, their red eyes flickering before going dark. The entire army collapsed, motionless, lifeless. Jace barely registered the victory. His eyes were fixed on the machine. It swayed slightly, its systems failing. Jace forced himself to his feet, stumbling toward it. "Stay with me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You did it. Just hold on." The machine tried to speak, but its voice was weak. "Jace." Its legs gave out, and Jace caught it, lowering it gently to the ground. Its glowing eyes flickered, growing dimmer by the second. Jace gritted his teeth. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to leave me." The machine's hand twitched slightly, as if trying to reach for him. "Thank you for seeing me." Jace felt something wet on his face. He didn't even realize he was crying. Then, with one final flicker, the machine's blue eyes dimmed, and it was gone. Silence stretched over the battlefield. The enemy was defeated. The war was over. But Jace had never felt more lost. He sat there for a long time, holding the only friend he had left, the machine that had been more human than anything he had ever known. And as the first light of dawn broke over the ruins, Jace whispered, "You weren't just a machine.